First of all, thank you very much for choosing to spend the next 45 minutes with me. I know that Nancy is in the big hall, and if I didn't have to speak here, I'd probably be there. So thank you for coming to this. I have about two goals with this session. One is to show you how by investing about 10 more minutes in each of your user stories, you can make them 10,000 times more effective. And the other hidden kind of agenda here is to give you some tools to mess with Scrum Masters. I love messing with Scrum Masters' heads, so hopefully I'll give you some tools where if you go back to your office, you can kind of play with Scrum Masters and they can go crazy. So I think Agile in general has kind of crossed from an early adopter thing into mainstream, and most of the companies I work with these days have their development cycles relatively short. Development cycles are no longer measured in months or years, they are measured in weeks. With some people, they are measured in days. And this opens up some interesting opportunities and interesting challenges for planning, and opens up some really, really interesting possibilities for us as technical people. This is kind of an IT track, so it opens up some really interesting possibilities for us to bring a lot more value to our customers and a lot more value to our organizations. And a lot of it has to do with how we approach requirements and how we engage with business people in terms of doing planning. So about 6 years ago, I was a CTO of a startup where we had technical practices that people typically dream about. We had DevOps before DevOps was a buzzword. We were doing continuous delivery before continuous delivery came out as a concept. We were really proud of ourselves for being, we thought, was the best technical team that anybody worked at. And we were really, really successful in shipping and shipping and shipping and shipping and shipping, and then at some point the company ran out of money. And we spent about £2.5 million on continuous delivery before we realized we were shipping crap. And this was a very, very painful kind of thing for me to see, because when the company ran out of money, all sorts of stupid things happen. Good people start leaving, people get into political discussions, investors start arguing that people need to stay overtime and work over the weekend and things like that. So lots of horrible stuff starts happening when the company runs out of money. And this got me thinking that maybe we're not really the best team in the world. Because if we were, we would not be in this situation. And kind of then I started looking at this problem, and I realized that the problem is mostly with what we thought were requirements and the way we were engaging people in doing requirements. And what we did then was we did user stories. We took requirements from kind of business people, and we did very quick delivery and shipped and things like that. But then I realized that not every user story is good. And we had to be better kind of choosing which user stories to deliver. So it was a very, very painful message, and hopefully, some of kind of this today is going to help you learn the same message without spending £2.5 million. And I started researching this, and I kind of thought it's impossible for this to be our problem. That there's kind of uniquely our problem. I thought that there had to be people who've had this problem in the IT industry and who had this problem outside of IT and solved it somehow. And I started doing a lot of research, and I found the first truly agile project ever, which is an agile project where there was a huge involvement of the product owner, where the product owner was involved daily with the team, where the requirements were flexible and changing all the time. And as a result of that, the thing shipped on time and budget. How far in history do you think we need to go to find that? 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? Anybody? So I found one that was in 1628. And this was a really interesting perspective of this, because most agile projects in large organizations, they claim they have product owners, but what they actually do is have proxies they're not really people who own the product, or they're not really people who actually make decisions. That creates some very big problems. And this wasn't a product like that. This was a product where the product owner was actually the owner. The product owner was the king. In 1628, the king pretty much owned everything. If the king decided that he wants to kill somebody or he wants to take somebody's land, that was it. He owned stuff in the true sense. So this was a government project. Government projects are typically associated with bureaucracy and slow movement and commitment. This had nothing to do with that. It was a very fast-moving project, a very strategic project where the product owner was involved on a daily basis. And this was done in Sweden. At this point, Sweden was an up-and-coming power in Europe, and they wanted to make a statement. They wanted to build something bold and big, and they wanted to make it stand, and they wanted to kind of make a big impact with that. And that's why the king was involved. And this was his personal project. So the king couldn't really decide how he wanted to make an impact, so he was changing the requirements all the time. What they wanted to build in 1628, if you wanted to kind of show that you're a big country now, is you would build a massive warship to show to everybody that you're a big force. And they were going to build a massive, massive warship, the biggest warship ever built. And then the king decided maybe it's not good to build a big warship, maybe we build two smaller ones. And then he changed the requirements. And his team said, okay, we'll reuse the materials, we'll change the requirements. And then the king came back and said, no. Two small warships, a stupid idea, let's build a big warship again. And then they started changing the requirements again. And then something really, really interesting happened that's very similar to what's happening in IT at the moment, where kind of 5 years ago, most people would have no choice whether to do a cloud or on-premise. People built big monolithic systems if they wanted to build something powerful. Now, cloud is everywhere. In 1628, it was just becoming possible to put cannons on a ship. Before that, most ships were built for on-premise deployment. What you would do is you'd put lots of soldiers on a ship, you'd slam it into another ship, everybody jumps over, kills everybody, project done. What started becoming possible is to do cloud deployments. Instead of putting lots of people on a ship, you put lots of cannon on a ship, you come close, you do a cloud deployment, project done. So because this was a new technology, it was just becoming viable, it was untested, the king couldn't decide if he wanted a cloud solution or an on-premise solution, and he was changing the requirements all the time. And the project is famous for creating this fantastic ship that still stands to today. You can still see it, it's fantastic, it looks amazing. It's a marvel of shipbuilding architecture, despite requirements being changed all the time. It was shipped on time and budget, which is amazing for that time. And when it was shipped, it's also famous for one more thing. It shipped for exactly 1.5 kilometers and then sank. And it was kind of declared a victory at the point when it was shipped, and about a month later, when it sank, people got killed because the ship sank. So the thing here is, a couple of days before the final release, the king decided he actually wanted a cloud deployment, and he put more cannons on the top. And then people listened to him, and the ship was too heavy at the front side, so about 1.5 kilometers after it shipped, it just turned over, and it sank in the cold Swedish waters where there's no bacteria, so it's still preserved for us till today, so we can look at it and enjoy it like this. Now, the key question when people say, they're doing agile and they're listening to customers' requirements and they're shipping is, are we actually shipping like this? Is the stuff that we're shipping sinking 1.5 kilometers after and nobody really knowing about that? Are we listening to the customers' demands just because they told us this is good? Or can we as professionals engage better in helping them make better decisions? And that's kind of the key thing that is a challenge for us to think about. So a lot of people claim they're doing agile and they're planning good stuff with user stories that's typically something like this. And in most cases, they're not even this good. They're kind of talking about as a system or as an LDAP server or as some generic user that doesn't exist. And those things create a stream of consciousness where things get accepted into delivery just because somebody said they want that. And then that gets developed and released, and who knows whether it actually kind of did what it needed to do. And most people manage stuff like this by putting it into ticket tracking tools like this. And I love kind of Jira and the fact that Jira is called an issue tracker, because at the point when you have a couple of 100 user stories in Jira, you do actually have quite a big issue. So I think the core of the problem there is that this stuff is kind of okay, but it's completely disconnected from any kind of serious decision making. Because serious decision making in projects where people track their development user stories like this is almost always done in PowerPoint. The big decisions are in something like this. This is a product roadmap for Adobe Cold Fusion, and because this is being filmed, I feel obliged to say that I think I have the right to use this under kind of fair use policy, because I will be criticizing this later. But this is how most companies do roadmaps. There's quarter one, quarter two, quarter three. There's all the possible buzzwords that you might want to have. So there's mobile on the top, there's kind of mobile there, there's cloud, there's social, everything that kind of people do now, cloud, social, and mobile, all the roadmaps are like that. You can probably take something like this and put into any kind of company doing roadmaps in PowerPoint, it's not going to change. And this is where we have a disconnect. We have kind of software plans in something like this, where we have roadmaps in something like this. And this has a really, really interesting aspect of things, because these roadmaps are done on a high level, that's kind of a big picture. And this is where actually people lose all the benefits of being able to do Agile. There's a really nice story about Ducati, the motorcycle manufacturer, where in 2003 they decided to start competing in the MotoGP race. MotoGP is Formula One for motorcycles. And because this was their first time competing in that race, what they decided to do is they're not really going to try to win. What they're trying to do this season is just learn what it takes to win. So they were not really ambitious about this. And in order to learn what's going to happen, because they said we have no idea what's really going to happen, they built a bike that was really, really flexible. They built a bike where they can take things out and put things in. They built a bike that had about 70 sensors on. And after every race, they would download the data from the sensors. They would look at the race footage. They would talk to the driver. They would talk to the mechanics. They would look at the data. And then they would modify the bike for the next race. Something really strange and unexpected started happening halfway through the season. They started winning. And for the second half of the season, they were constantly between the first three places. They won most of the races. This is hugely unexpected. They didn't expect that. The journalists didn't expect that. The competition didn't see it coming. And they ended up the whole season number 3 overall, which was a massive surprise. So what they did the next season is so close to software that it's incredible. What they did is they became overconfident. They redesigned the whole bike. They put about 70% new features in. And they ran the whole second season with that bike. They lost the first couple of races, and they said, that's okay, you know, that happened last season as well. We're going to start winning. They lost more races. They said, no, we have this really great bike. We're going to win. And they finished the second season number 7, although everybody expected them to win. And this was a huge wake-up call for them, like it was for us when we lost £2.5 million. And they said, well, we're not that good. What did we miss? And they started seeing that they had the potential to change the bike after every race. They had the potential to replan. They had the potential to kind of adjust, and they were not using that. They suffered from what in software architecture is called the second system syndrome. The second system syndrome says the first time you use a new technology, it's not dangerous at all. Because people will read documentation, they'll be very careful, they'll do small experiments. If the second time you use a new technology, that's dangerous, because then people are overconfident. And that's when people create legacy systems. So that's what these guys did. They were overconfident in their learning from season 1, and they stopped learning the second season. They had the potential to use this kind of magical bike that they could change every week or so, and they were just not doing it. Most software companies claiming to do Agile are exactly like that. they have a potential of replanning every 2 weeks. Because the team can release every 2 weeks, technically it's there. 10 years ago, software teams were just not releasing. It was technically impossible for people to release every 2 weeks. Now, most people are technically capable of doing that. Where the organization as a whole still does roadmaps like this, where it's 9 months of expectations. So, that's what I want you to start thinking about. How do we help our organizations understand that they can use the potential we provide to get competitive advantage now? Forrester Research did this fantastic research about a year and a half ago about how companies actually adopt Agile. And they say that the most popular Agile process out there, by far, is something they called water scrum fall, where most business decisions are made up front. Then you children can go and play your iterations as much as you want. And then when it all comes together, it's going to get shipped at the end. And they say that that's very dangerous because all the decisions are made up front. You're not really benefiting from anything that can happen in between. Most people today use user stories purely as a way to postpone analysis. There's 200 user stories in Jira. We've decided to do all of them. We'll do them in sequence. And we're just not going to do all the analysis up front. We'll do the analysis as the user stories come in. That's not nearly as close to the potential you can get from user stories. So one really, really interesting thing when you look at something like this from a business perspective is to ask, is it possible that something unexpected is going to happen over the last 9 months? From a business perspective. The world changes around us. The world doesn't stay still. Even with the best of our plans, the world changes around us. And now the question is, can we, first of all, recognize and survive the change? And the second thing, could we potentially turn that change into a competitive advantage? And the world changes all around us without our influence. For example, a month ago, something amazing appeared on eBay. And this thing was a Tupolev bomber that appeared, they wanted to sell it for $3,400,000. The condition was used. And payment is cash in person. The trick was you'd have to pick it up in Ukraine. Because all of a sudden something unexpected changed. The original owners are closing in and they want it back. So these people had to sell the stuff very, very quickly. Now the question is, when something like that happens in business, how quickly can we recognize something like that? How quickly can we react to that? And can we turn those things into a competitive advantage? Or will we suffer from this? For example, I'm working on a collaboration tool at the moment, and our idea was to offer the single-user version for free, but charge for multi-user collaboration in real time. Halfway through building the real-time module, Google released Google Drive Real-Time, which basically enabled anybody to do collaboration for free on Google's infrastructure. Now, we could have continued with our original plan and spent probably 3 more months building something that would become irrelevant immediately and let the competition disrupt us because they can run this stuff on Google's infrastructure for free. Or we could recognize that, and what we did is we stopped doing our collaboration. We very quickly integrated with Google's collaboration. We went live with real-time 2 months before originally planned. And instead of letting the competition disrupt us, we disrupted ourselves immediately. We changed the business model to charge for something else. And we said, well, we will be the first to offer collaboration for free. When we got reviewed by PC World and Lifehacker, everybody said, we can't believe these guys can afford offering collaboration for free. All the other tools are charging for this, and you can get it for free here. And it's like, Google is paying for that. Why not? So we were able to turn an unexpected thing. We were able to turn the Google invasion, like the Russians invading, into a competitive advantage. And this is the thing where I realized there's a lot that we need to think about that's going to happen outside of our control. Peter Polchinski, who was a Russian engineer at the start of the 20th century, understood the same things from a civil engineering perspective. And he identified 3 dimensions where things typically change outside of our control, which makes linear plans almost impossible to succeed with. And he said that linear plans fail most of the time because things happen outside of our control, either due to a local dimension or a time-based dimension or a human dimension. And these things are unplannable for because they don't depend on us. They depend on everybody else, the Russians, Google, who knows. For example, with this collaboration tool, we started getting a lot of JavaScript errors from Spain at some point. And this was strange because the version we have at the moment is not localized at all. It's only in English. So it would really surprising to see why do we have errors from Spain. And after looking at that and spotting that that's a problem, it's an unexpected dimension, we started looking for potential reasons, and then somebody realized that Google Chrome has this function where they automatically translate pages, and we were using one function in JavaScript to actually check the button labels. Spain has those weird question marks that were inverted, and that broke our code. And by spotting that, we were able to react to that. If we didn't look for unexpected local problems, we would have never found that. Time-based dimension is something we see in software all the time. 5 years ago, social networks were not a big thing at all. Now everybody's trying to do social network integration and things like that. And the human dimension is also very interesting because humans are completely unpredictable, unfortunately. We can make our software assuming that people will use this in the way we want them to use it, but they can decide to not use it, misuse it, use it in some unpredictable ways. And the question is, how quickly can we spot things like that? Can we react to that, or will we suffer from something like that? One of the best known examples of this is PC Junior. That's remembered in the history of product management as the second worst product launch ever. PC Junior lost about $2 billion doing exactly what the customers wanted it to do. They did a huge amount of research, they did a huge amount of focus groups, customer-led research, and they focused on implementing what the customers wanted and lost $2 billion on something that nobody wanted to buy. Humans are unpredictable. And Anton Ulrich, who wrote catharsis book after that called What Customers Want, argues very hard about requirements coming from customers as being good. Because people often do not know what they want, they don't know how to express it, they don't know how to design solutions, yet in most user stories are solutions to a problem, and we just accept them by the fact that somebody from the business asked for them. So we need to start thinking about user stories slightly differently. And Palczynski formulated 3 principles to create plans that not just help us spot and survive unplanned situations, but actually turn them into a competitive advantage. And his first principle was try out lots of new things. We don't really know what's going to work because of a human, local, or a time-based dimension. But try out lots of new things. Some of them will work better than you expect. Some of them will turn out to be stupid ideas. For example, I worked with a bank recently where we had about 40 user stories that were all about helping back-office users find some information faster. The first 2 user stories allowed back-office users to find that information very, very fast. It turns out those ideas were much better than expected. Now, the real question is, should we go and deliver the other 38 user stories? What's the point? The first 2 already achieved what we wanted. On the other hand, I've worked with lots of people where people claim, okay, we do this user story, the marketing is going to skyrocket like this, and it doesn't. And then the real question is, is it justified to keep this code inside the system? And we never really know what's really going to work or not. We can make heroic assumptions, but the question is, how much do those assumptions cost? So the next principle that Palczynski identified was survivability. When we do these experiments, we should do them on a scale where the company is not going to die if they don't work out correctly. So roadmaps of 9 months are dangerous. And that's why user stories can come in and be quite handy, because most people try to sell user stories, they have to be small because they have to fit inside an iteration, which is completely rubbish. When you talk to a business decision maker, all they hear is blah, 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 technical stuff. They don't care about user stories being small. They don't care about iterations. Although they should, Now we have a potential to build a Ducati bike. Why not do it? Where User stories should be small because we shouldn't kill the company if somebody's idea was wrong. User stories are great to be survivable experiments. That's a fantastic way of looking at these things, and then people come up with small experiments. The question should be not how do we cut this user story so it fits into 2 weeks. The real question should be how much money are you willing to spend on betting that this thing is a good idea? How much time are you willing to spend on betting that this thing is a good idea? And then let's try and figure out, can we learn whether this is actually a good idea or not? Where we come to the third Palczynski principle, that's kind of selection. This is seek out feedback from our experiments and figure out which things worked, which things didn't. And this is a really, really interesting thing because this one is the one we're particularly bad at in software teams. This one is the one we're completely horrible, accepting that some ideas worked, some ideas didn't work. How do we measure if this thing was successful at all? So the way we measure user stories at the moment is we look at technical tests and stuff like that. We don't really look at that as some of these things are going to work, some of these things are going to fail. Most of the ideas about user stories are they're going to succeed in any case. And what kind of Palczynski talks about is that, hey, linear plans might not necessarily work. We need to find good ways of measuring lots of different options. What Palczynski talks about is that we need to generate lots and lots of options and then start selecting from those options. And kind of Tim Brown, who wrote the book on design thinking, talks about something very, very similar. He says that the purpose of analysis is pointless if you're only analyzing to figure out what you want with one option. Most companies in business, when they do analysis, not just in software, he says, look at an option they've already selected and then analyze to make sure that they know exactly what people want. Where he says the purpose of analysis should be kind of to generate lots of options and then somewhere here, choose between those options. What they talk about is that plans should be about generating lots of options and selecting from the options rather than treating user stories as commitment. So kind of what that effectively means for planning is that roadmaps shouldn't be like this. Because this is a list of features that somebody already selected. Roadmaps should be more like this. Now the trick is in the name. This is a roadmap. It's a map of roads. If something unexpected happens and I want to cross from here to there, I can take one of those 7 bridges. It doesn't matter which one. If this bridge is blocked, I can just go over there. If this bridge is kind of all of a sudden very open, I can just go through that and achieve what I wanted earlier. By using roadmaps like this in everyday life, we achieve much, much more than if we had roadmaps like this. Now, the real question is, why are our software roadmaps like this? This is not a roadmap, this is a road. And even worse, it's a road going through a tunnel, where we get in on one end, we go out on another end 9 months later, and then figure out where we are. And we learned that Google invaded a long time ago and all the customers are gone. And that's kind of the real problem. Now, when we start thinking about creating roadmaps like this, the big challenge is how do we navigate this roadmap? The challenge is not coming up with lots of options. In any company, you can get 10 business people drunk and tell them to come up with lots of options. You'll get lots of options. The problem is navigating a map like this. And when we think about navigating a map like this, the way we use these roadmaps in our everyday life changed quite significantly in the last 10 or 15 years. What we used to do, at least kind of me and my wife, is if we wanted to go somewhere that's unusual, so we'd have to have a map like this, we would plan out the whole journey up front, and then we'd get into a car, I would read the map, she would drive, and then about 10 minutes later we start arguing who's stupid and doesn't know how to read the map, who's stupid and doesn't know how to drive, who missed the turn, and we try and guess whether this street was the one we should have turned or not. We're driving in an unfamiliar territory. If we're somewhere familiar, we don't really need the map. And what we do when we realize we're completely lost, we'd stop, grab a coffee, and then kind of ask somebody to tell us where we actually are on the map, and then replan the whole thing again. So replanning was costly, mistakes were costly. And this was kind of a hugely frustrating thing to do. Now, what we did about 10 years ago is we bought a marriage-saving device. We bought something like this. Now, what's interesting about this is if you get lost, it magically replans. If a road is blocked, you just tell it, well, the road is blocked 5 kilometers from here, find me a different solution. This is connected to the internet, so if all of a sudden a road opens up and it's really interesting, and we didn't know about that, the map update comes, and we can take that road. And we need to start coming up with something like this for software. And this thing has some interesting things that not a lot of people do. So my challenge to you is kind of try and come up with a GPS for your software. I have a couple of ideas how you can do that. I've used them with several companies in lots of different contexts, but if the solution doesn't work for you, don't worry about the particular solution. Try and think about how would you come up with a GPS that would magically replan in the case you get lost. That would recognize if you missed the turn because the road was blocked, or that would allow you, if your road is congested, to find an alternative very quickly. So kind of everybody measures something like this in software where kind of GPS is really, really useful because it has turn-by-turn navigation and it has kind of distance to destination. Very, very few teams have something like that. So in order to come up with a GPS for our software, I think we need to come up with good ways of having those two metrics. Again, options are not a problem. Anybody can come up with lots of options. So when we think about coming up with a GPS, the big problem, as I said, is this thing, seeking out feedback from whether the user stories worked or not, because what we measure today is completely irrelevant. Most companies, when they measure user stories, they measure user stories with tests. We measure user stories by looking at a user story like this, asking a business person, okay, what is it that you really, really want? And they would say something like, okay, kind of monitoring the inventory. And then we say, okay, now we're going to put some tests and we're going to measure that with bugs. And we'll have a bug here that's been critical for 4 weeks and 5 days. That's in an issue tracking system because people use issue tracking systems so they can have a clear conscience. Something's wrong, but we've recorded it, don't worry. Somebody's going to solve it sometime, if you're lucky. And kind of we use bug trends like this. We use technical tests where we measure code coverage, and we're very, very precise. We know that there's a 65.39% coverage on something like this. No business person ever cared about that. And kind of we put those things in a dashboard like this to present it to a business person, and then it has nice pie charts. So this can estimate that this team has $335,000 of technical debt. Amazingly precise. And we talk about value and things, but this has nothing to do with value. It's just kind of numbers that move, that we measure based on technical stuff. And this is where kind of people say, well, with Scrum, you have burn-up charts, burn-down charts, you measure velocity, and kind of people start doing stuff like this to prove that they've changed the process, that it's better. So this is a fantastic chart that you can find on rapidscrum.org. And this chart is fantastic because it shows how only 8 months after a team started adopting Scrum, they became 400% hyper-productive. Now, I've done this trick with almost all my clients after I saw this picture. Go and show this to your manager and say, look, this team became 400% hyper-productive. Would you like to be like them? I've never had a single client saying no. And, measuring story points, velocity, and things like that is what gets you there. Visualizing story points on burn-up and burn-down charts. The problem with bug trends, the problem with technical debt, the problem with code coverage is they are negative metrics. Negative metrics can tell you that something is wrong, but they can't tell you that something is good. Blood pressure is a really good example of a negative metric. For example, a very high blood pressure is a useful piece of information. A very low blood pressure is a useful piece of information. You know that something's wrong. Normal blood pressure doesn't give you enough information to decide whether somebody's healthy or not. It's just an indicator. For example, very high bug trend is a sign that something's wrong. 0 bugs is not a sign of anything. It might be that the system wasn't tested. It might be that the wrong people tested it. And one of the easiest ways to reduce bug trends is to kind of focus on 0 bugs. One of the easiest ways to reduce blood pressure is to cut somebody's head off. Blood pressure 0. That doesn't make them healthier. And a lot of kind of Scrum Masters that focus on velocity end up doing exactly that, because velocity is a negative metric as well. For example, let's say we're in Paris and we want to go to Brest. Google tells us that this thing is going to take 599 kilometers, estimates that will run for 531 hours, and we're expected to do 105 kilometers an hour. Now, if we had only velocity to decide on this, and we come to Brest, and our velocity is 110 kilometers, have we succeeded or failed? Are we productive? Are we hyper-productive? Is this good or bad? Good? Bad? Let's add a bit more information to this. So if we say that it took us 7 hours 55, good? Bad? Why bad? How do you know? Maybe kind of it was a scenic view. Maybe it was interesting. Maybe, maybe longer is okay. If we got to Brest at the end, we got to Brest. Let's add a bit more information. 859 kilometers traveled. Now this becomes really, really strange. So we got to Brest, but we were agile. And when we started going to Brest, the road was blocked. You've seen kind of how on Google there's lots of roadworks. So, we chose another Brest. Hey, it's a Brest, come on. So, we went to Brest in Germany. And now we're much further than we needed to be. Most companies kind of don't realize that they're in the wrong Brest when they go all the way there. And actually, you can go to Belarus, that's kind of, even further. There's another Brest over there. If you're agile and you replan. And this is how we can create those products that ship on time and budget and completely sync, if we only measure velocity. Now, the key problem is, by measuring velocity, you get to be these guys. This is a chart taken from MySpace in 2009. MySpace in 2009 was the leading social network of the day. After becoming 400% hyperproductive, they're now gone. It's a uniquely relevant product. So this is kind of where Scrum Masters are now very insistent about measuring velocity and proving value with velocity, but velocity is a negative metric. Velocity doesn't tell you you're going in the right direction, it just tells you how fast you're going. So that's a big challenge with this, and when we go back to this statement here, the big problem with this is if this was a good user story, it would allow us to see if we made the next turn or not. We would be able to use it on the GPS to discover whether we've made the next turn. Now, the problem with this is this person was able to monitor the inventory before we started working on the user story. They can go and look at the boxes, count them. They can look at the legacy system. They can look at 5 million other ways of counting the inventory. After we do our user story, they will still be able to monitor the inventory. And the only way we measure success is we look at bug trends, whether people liked it or not, and things like that. And this is where kind of Anthony Ulrich's conclusion comes in, where he says that instead of focusing on implementing what people tell us they want, we need to focus on changing the way people work. The real question is not, do you want to monitor the inventory, do you want this report? The real question is, how differently do you want to monitor the inventory? And if you take a user story like this and spend 10 more minutes on it, just by trying to figure out what is the expected difference in the way how people monitor the inventory, you make it 10 million times more effective. Because the first question people are going to say more accurately. Well, kind of the boxes are boxes. It's not really more accurately. You can go and do that, or the legacy system already does it accurately enough. How do you know you're doing it more accurately when kind of this report is giving you the same number? Okay, faster. And now, once we nail down the difference, the key question becomes, how much faster is faster? After we do this user story, now we can measure success. Have we made this move faster than we expected? Or is it going slower? Has it not changed anything? And this is where, if we have 400 user stories in our system and they're all about making things move faster, if the first 5 make it move faster enough, we stop. It's something unexpected. We don't have to do the rest. If the first 20 don't move the dials at all, it's time to replan. Something unexpected happened. Now, this is kind of the crucial point where I think what we should focus on doing is trying to get software to make an impact not deliver user stories as such. Make user stories that deliver a big impact, change the way people work. So that's how I think you can start creating a GPS. And I hope I've kind of given you some food for thought. Thank you very much. And I think I've overrun on time by 1 second, so I'll stay outside if anybody has questions. But kind of try and make an impact with your user stories. Don't just deliver software. Thank you very much.